Welcome, and we're glad you're joining tonight. This is another Tuesday night. We are here live if you're watching it at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night. Actually, we're a minute early, man.
No.
This clock is wrong.
All right, whatever.
It's totally wrong. Anyway, we're
This
here.
says
And now it's 7
7
o'clock.
o'clock.
Yeah,
That's the
you
same.
okay? That's the same. Yeah, okay.
6:59 my watch.
Okay, so it's 6:59 your time. You're local. And if you're not watching this live, welcome. We're glad you're joining us anyway. And if you are joining us live, we encourage you to ask questions, as always. So tonight, this is number 2 in what, it's a series, and I have a few more in mind to do. We'll see how tonight goes. That'll determine how many we kind of continue on. But I think it's a good topic because it's very current. And something that everybody, no matter who you are, will have to face and deal with, and dependent on your stance in society and when it comes to these major issues, things like gender, things like race, things like Christianity, the Bible. All these things have these two sides, these two worldviews when it comes to society. And so, talking about the issue of societal constructs, we have mentioned societal constructs peppered throughout multiple podcasts, and 201 podcasts now, and we've never actually really talked deeply about the issue of societal, which you actually mentioned last week. You phrased societal pressure, which is a really good way of looking at it. And so I want to talk about that tonight. I was thinking about this when I was a kid. I was just thinking about how my experience with societal pressure or societal construct. And like I said, I think pressure is probably the better word. But I went through a program called DARE. Do you remember that program at all? Do you remember hearing about it? I don't think you went through it. It probably was after your time as far as grade school and stuff goes. But DARE stands for Drug Abuse Resistance Education. Mm-hmm. And so it was a program they actually put us through in elementary school. I remember it. And I remember the Officer Fernandez, the guy that came, he was a big, burly Mexican dude, and he was such a cool guy. He was an Alameda police officer, and so we saw him around town. So he was Officer Fernandez. We knew who he was. He was a super cool guy, very friendly and but also very serious, and looked like the type of guy who maybe might have been Jocko Willink's friend or something like that. He's a big dude. And but I remember he'd come to our class, and they'd pull out this suitcase. They had all the real. We got to see what real drugs looked like, and here we are. We're elementary school. You know what I mean? Third, fourth, fifth.
You go out and find your dealer. I want one of those.
Yeah. So funny, because at the time that's exactly how I saw it. I was like, man, he's just showing us how to identify drugs, But so I think the first time I ever smoked weed, I want to say I was in 5th or 6th grade. I just started skateboarding. I was hanging out with some other skateboarders who were quite a bit older than me, and they all smoked weed. But at the end of this program, we got the T-shirt. We passed the program. We get this nice, cool T-shirt that said DARE across the front. It had the thing, and sometimes it had like a little graphic on the back. And I remember the first time I smoked weed, the guy I was smoking with looks at me and he goes, "Dude, you're totally wearing your DARE shirt." And so the irony, in my mind, definitely, even at the time, wasn't lost on me. Yeah. And so the reason why that's interesting in this specific podcast is because back then there really was a big emphasis on how to handle peer pressure, and that was one of their main points in DARE, right? And then I remember they talked about it in school. They talked about peer pressure when it came to issues of sex. They talked about peer pressure when it came to issues of drugs and crime. I mean, the school had a curriculum that was scattered throughout the year that was properly how to handle peer pressure. Now, since then, weed has become legalized.
Yes.
Psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, has also become legalized.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, if I knew that, I'd be taking it. Gosh, I didn't know.
Yeah, it's apparently
only kidding.
It's apparently a therapeutic. They use it as a therapeutic, and some
Oh
doctors
yeah,
actually
in the
prescribe it.
but you have to get it by prescription. You can't just go.
Right, yeah, I think it is
Right.
prescription.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So,
Yeah.
and then in 2020, some of you will have heard about this. In 2020, Oregon passed a measure that decriminalized small amounts of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and other controlled substances.
Small amounts. What's a small amount?
Okay.
I only have one injection worth.
So, I think whatever their logic was behind it is kind of beside the point. But the point that I wanted to make is, in not so long a time, the very people who used to be the advocates against this kind of madness have actually become the advocates for.
Yeah.
And they have now put it in place where, hey, listen, if you feel like doing it, do it, safely.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
make it legal. Maybe that'll help with the overload.
Right.
If you make
Yeah.
things mysterious, people want it more, and all. And it's just like, it's crazy. But add to that doctors who are encouraging and advocating things like gender reassignment, grooming, and medications to because boys don't, at some point they start questioning what is gender. I like playing with dolls, and they need some kind of and so I'm not trying to get political here, but working at a university has really opened my eyes to how much we no longer, it's not just peer pressure that people deal with. It's now authority pressure, and what you could call superior pressure. So all of that to say, it's just a good example of how our society has shifted way further down a destructive road when it comes to human development.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to societal constructs, let's just define that completely right now. Let's just, what is societal constructs? And then in that same answer, what is it not?
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's funny you mention this, because I was thinking about this whole idea of societal constructs and just thinking of it from the standpoint of, does anybody really believe there's this small group of people that sat down and said, what do we want society to be like? Who are somehow disconnected from society, and so to me, it's funny because the whole idea of societal constructs is funny because I see it as a misnomer. I don't see it as a real thing.
Yeah.
Because that whole idea that because especially as a Christian, you're talking to people a lot about, religion, in general, and that's a common thing for people to say, oh, religion's just a societal construct. And it's like, well, if there is no God and we weren't created and we just evolved out of nothing, then where did these people come from? These contracted societal construction workers, where did they come from? That all of a sudden out of the blue, they just kind of, okay, what we need to do, I mean, literally like that, is contractors, is going and buying a plot of land and developing, a mall or something, it's like, who sat down and said, okay, so we're going to have over here, this country is going to be Hindu. And then we're going to make this country over here, we'll try something different here. We'll make a religion called Islam, and then we'll make in America we'll make a religion called Christianity, and that will be, so America's the Christian mall, and it's so silly, to me personally, to talk about the idea of societal constructs, because that is the idea that these are things that have been, what has become socially acceptable, but leaving out the fine details. I mean, it's so, to me, it's so interesting to hear the conversations about, how things came to be, or what people believe how things came to be, and even in the church, not just non-Christians, but Christians as well, how everything came to be, the amount of guessing, that has been adopted as fact, to many people, because that makes logical sense to me. May not make logical sense to somebody who has a brain, but it makes logical sense to me, so therefore it's fact, and that's what I believe now. And there's so much of that, that the idea of, societal constructs is often a term that's used by somebody, which is basically another way of saying, I don't like this.
Yeah.
That's really all it means, is I don't like this, and so I'm not going to abide by it because it's a societal construct.
It's almost like they're saying that this is unstable. People came up with this unstable.
Yes, somebody came up with this, they never really thought it through, and, Yeah. So that's kind of, because that's the thing I think is interesting about it, is that whole idea of that there was this sort of plan, how these things came into being. Which is funny, because to admit that there's a plan and things came into being is to admit that there's a God. You have to, because somebody had the blueprint. Somebody somewhere had the blueprint that the society has constructed.
Yeah.
And so somebody gave them a blueprint from somewhere, in order to be able to make that construction. And so that's the interesting thing to me, because I think, honestly, I don't know that there really is a such thing as a true, genuine atheist. And the reason why I say that is because I've never met one. I've met people who don't like God, but I've never really met a true atheist that, when I would talk to them for long enough, that they don't get upset because of the idea that, I believe God exists.
Yeah.
It has to come to a point somewhere where you're an idiot. It has to become part of the conversation. You're stupid because you believe in God. And which to me is, I've said it, I used to use this on my kids when they were younger, is that when you're in a conversation with somebody and you've got to say you're a poo-poo head, that's it. It's over. It's over. You've lost the debate. You have come to the end of your intelligence level, and now you're just resorting to just brute force, brawn. No more brain, just brawn. And so I would say that to them when they would, start to try to argue with me about things. I'd say, "Oh, here we go. You're a poo-poo head."
There was a quote.
A quote.
There was a quote. You brought it back to memory. I can't remember who it was by, but basically it might have actually been Socrates. I think he said,
"Say it and I'll tell
the
you."
loser.
Because I know.
The loser.
Or I'll make it up, and then I'll know. It'll be a fact after I make it up.
I think it's when someone's losing an argument, the one who loses an argument resorts to insult.
Yeah, I don't want to.
You don't remember that one? Yeah, I think that's how it's said. I might.
But it's true.
That. You know who it was? Throw that in if you know.
Yeah, there you go.
Quote it. Somebody go quickly. Chat GPT or Google if you're.
Yeah, and then pretend like you already knew.
So, some common things. It's interesting. Some common things that have been called a societal construct. It's very interesting, actually. I heard a statement. Actually, this was in Stanford training, which all students and employees have to go through. So you're talking about thousands of people see this every time. In the year, thousands of people see this training, and they say it emphatically as well. Race is a social construct.
Right.
And I think you might remember I actually sent you a text asking what you thought of that. Yeah. I was in the middle of the training, and I was like, I've never heard that before. That's crazy.
Too big for a text.
Yes.
I didn't even bother.
So, which is why I didn't ask it again. I figured we'd just do a podcast on it. But I'm almost done with Why Gender Matters. And he quotes Dr. Judith Butler, who's she's apparently a philosopher, which I didn't know, and also a gender theorist. Mm-hmm. I don't even. Where do these titles come from? I don't get.
A gender theorist is somebody who makes stuff up about gender.
I guess that's an official. That's an official title. You need a PhD for that. That's how I wonder.
Yeah. I went to school and I got a PhD, so now I can make up stuff about gender.
That's a interesting. Anyway, she wrote a book called Gender Trouble, and in her book, she literally says gender is a societal construct.
Yeah.
Some other common societal constructs: money apparently is a societal construct. Mm-hmm. Marriage. Class, social class, is a societal construct. Nationality is a societal construct. So I just mentioned all these. I'm curious. Let's just run through these and see what you think about these. So we already talked about gender quite a bit in the last podcast. We don't necessarily need to beat that, but specifically in the context of societal construct, why or why not gender?
Well, because this is the interesting thing, because it really does come down to this. It is a societal construct to say that gender is a societal construct, but it's a societal construct in the making. Yeah. It's not actually here yet, because other people haven't. Not everybody's bought into it yet. But eventually it will be forced.
A small group of people that are...
It's a small group of people that are trying to force this, and it's going to get larger because people who, have, PhDs and things like that are signing on to this kind of thinking. And so they're going to create a societal structure, construct in order to defeat this societal construct. It's a very interesting, way of combating things, is that you just fight fire with fire. You want to change things. You say this is a bad idea, and then you just keep hammering away at that idea until that idea is destroyed, and then it becomes a bad idea. But it's not. These are not. I mean, let's face the facts. No Christian. Nobody who believes in God. We can take it further. That believes in God believes that gender is a societal construct. It's an atheistic way of thinking, because you can go through the anatomy, you can talk about the development of an infant, but the bottom line is that we have a genetic makeup, and that genetic makeup can be classified. You can, the whole idea of non-binary. Yeah, nobody is binary. That's just a reality. Nobody is binary. Everybody can fit, somewhere between the poles. But there are poles. There's a pole. We know, and we still right now. 30 years from now, we may not, but right now we still know that girls play with dolls, boys play with trucks. That's pretty much a given. But that doesn't mean that a boy has to play with trucks to be a boy. It just is a tendency, And so, and playing with dolls is not necessarily make you a girl, but we do have these poles. And this is the problem is that, when you say, well, they're playing with dolls, so they're not a boy, and so therefore they're a girl, and they need to have a sex change so that they can have a girl. They can be a girl because it's who they are. Tell me that's not a social construct. I mean, you have to go in and have a surgical, thing in order to, surgical procedure, in order to have this happen to you, and it changes who you are fundamentally. So this isn't like, if you break your leg. When you break your leg, you go into the hospital. You don't come out with 4 legs.
Yeah.
You come out with the same 2 legs fixed. You don't come out with 4 legs. But you go in, to a surgery, you come out something else, at least out on the outside. What you are on the inside is a whole other story. And that's where a lot of the trouble lies, is that the idea that, somebody who's anxious is going to be changed by their changing their gender. That's naive, to think that, because being anxious is not a gender thing. It's not like women are anxious and men are not. So we are going to make you a man so that you're not anxious anymore. It doesn't. There's no, there's no relationship between those two things. And so, but the idea that this is something that has somehow been created. You need to have a lot of people born neutral in order for that to become a valid thing. You have to have a lot of people that are neither male nor female. They're somewhere in the middle, and you don't know what they are. And then you can start talking about social construct. But we don't have to. I mean, one of the phrases I think is very interesting, and it's funny to listen to people use it, because I know they believe it, but it's unusual. Is to talk about gender assigned at birth. The idea as if there was an option, as if the doctor said no, I'm going to sew some parts on, or I'm going to he's got like a drawer of male and female parts, and he says, okay, here's this Mr. Potato Head kid that comes out, and he says, well, I think I'm going to sew on a few bits and pieces here. This will be a man. This will be a male. Okay, next. Okay, this one. Oh, I think this one would be better as a female, so we'll make this as a female. And they assigned, they weren't assigned anything. The doctor looked and went, oh, look, a girl. Oh, look, a boy. Wasn't. There's no assigning. So, but we use these kinds of phrases, and you clearly are not talking about something that is a social construct. Because if it was, then there would be no reason for us to have to try to deconstruct it with force. It would be something that would be easy to take apart. It's just a social construct. Like, let me see if I can come up with something that would be if you think of thinking like, moving to another country. I moved to another country, and I've been raised as an American, but I know because I lived in England for 10 years, if I was born in England, I know I would be different, because I know what I'm like, and my kids grew up there, and a lot of their tendencies in terms of British or American have a lot to do with how I raised them. And so you could say, that culture is a societal construct, but they're not, that you can't do that with everything, and that's where I think the problem lies, is that it is a societal construct, but it is not a. Why is that a bad thing? I mean, that's really I think the most important question is, why is it a negative? Because something is a social construct.
Let's talk about that, because the thing that I put this question down is, what do you think is the real root of this whole contention about societal constructs? It's always in a negative sense. That's societal construct.
Yeah,
that's societal construct, and it's always in a negative.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Is just like, that's what I said is that the term has become, I don't like this.
Right.
So it's a societal construct. It's not that it is a societal construct, and I'm acknowledging that societal construct. It's, I don't like it, so I'm calling it a societal construct. Societal construct bad.
So you think, like, going back like Judith Butler, or whoever made this statement with this Stanford training, that's race or gender is a societal construct. This is down to, what part of this is bad? Like what? So I mean, and the reason I'm asking that question is I almost wonder, is there some kind of like missing answer, or an answer they don't want to acknowledge?
Yeah. Well, I can throw in it's a misrepresentation when it comes right down to it, because there are, if you start dissecting these particular things, you can get to the societal construct within the thing, like race, is this, as a societal construct. Well, it depends on what you mean when you say that, what you're talking about when you say that, because are you talking about like how different groups act, how they act, or how they identify amongst themselves? Yeah, okay. There are things that those are clearly societal constructs, because you can have people that are, from a particular race, that are, there's a 2024 version of that. There's also a 1924 version of that. Yeah. That's very, very different from each other. But the actual physical aspects, are still the same. What they look like is still the same. Now, what they look like is not a societal construct. So, like I said, it depends on what you're looking at when you're talking about these kinds of things, because there's no reason that all human beings could not act the same. Okay, there's a societal construct for all behavior. Because the idea of behavior is a whole nother thing. Behavior is fluid, but you can't mix that with the things that are not behavioral. There are differences, and they're not, it's funny because it's like, going back to the whole male and female, there are differences. There are just physical differences. We've learned this over time societally. That's why we have developed male sports and female sports, is because we have learned, that when they compete against each other, it's unfair. It's just simply unfair because they are not the same. We acknowledge that. We know that as a fact. They are not the same. And even now, trying to deal with all the transition and identification and stuff like that, they're having to come up with rules to try to say things like, you have to be at a certain hormonal level or whatever. You can't have some person who's it's we could go on and on and on about this. I was just thinking that's probably best to just stop, rather than to go too far, on all this, because it's just so silly. I mean, it is so silly. I mean, there's so many practical elements of it. If you've ever gone to a gym, I have never I've never had seen a person in a gym who I thought, pound for pound could compete with a woman, a female and a male, pound for pound. They just can't. I mean, even if the guy's not a lifter, this woman could be lifting all of her life, professional bodybuilder type stuff. Now, I'm not talking about taking, testosterone or steroids or things like that. I'm talking about just naturally, and some guy can come in and, and pound for pound, within a few months, he could outlift her. It's because there's a difference. There's just a metaphysical, not metaphysical, but a physiological difference between men and women, just the way the bodies are made, and they're just different, they're different, and you can't just go, oh, they're different because of testosterone, they're different because of this chemical, they're different because of that chemical, because we're not talking about the chemical. We're talking about the person that creates magically these chemicals and the other person that doesn't, and so there's a difference. The machine puts out different things, it's not, and you can't tweak the machine to make it do this other thing. You have to use external influence, like either surgeries or pharmaceuticals. It's not, there's nothing, it never becomes a natural thing. It's always a fabricated thing. And so people are not chemicals, and that's a big problem, is that, and the reason why I'm kind of sticking here is because it's still ground where people can think sanely on. If I was to try to talk about this in terms of different countries or different races, it would be all of a sudden, it would be, you're a bigot, and because we've already gone there in those kinds of things, is that you're just a bigot, and that's all there is to it, but people, people who are there's differences. There are differences, but that doesn't mean that those differences cannot be overcome. The issue is that often those differences are very difficult to overcome. And yes, it can be because of social constructs. When it comes to the issues of race and culture, I would definitely say absolutely, you can take an Indian or a black person or a white person or a Mexican, whatever. You just take anybody and put them in an environment, put them all in the same environment, and they can all function the same. So yes, there are social constructs associated with that, but a white man will never be a Mexican will never be a white man, a black man will never be an Indian. Those things will never happen, physically. Physically, it's just not going to happen because they are not. It's not a social construct. It is a nature, by nature, and so you're not going to change those things, and there are, like I was, because I've traveled a lot. When I was in living in Arizona, so I lived in Arizona, and Arizona is like, it's changed a lot. But when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of different races. It was all white cowboys. It wasn't. It really was. I mean, it was like that. And then and so I didn't have a lot of experience with different races. And then I moved around and started going to different races or going to different countries. And there are different races. I can look at somebody, I can look at them, and I can say, particularly because of my experiences, I can look and I can say, you're from Nigeria or you're from Ethiopia. Those were two in particular that I could tell a person who's from Ethiopia or a person from who's Nigeria by the way they looked. That's not a social construct. But whether or not somebody from Ethiopia or somebody from Nigeria is naturally, stupid or smarter than everybody else, there's no reality in that whatsoever,
Right.
which is the problem,
Right.
back in, when you're talking about prejudice
Yeah.
and things like that. But when you're talking about, being a social construct, I think you have to ask yourself the question, what do you mean when you say that? I mean, what attributes are you looking at? Are you looking at the physical attributes, or are you looking at the the more metaphysical attributes? Things that are more fluid, and can be
Yeah.
changed. Intelligence is fluid. Intelligence can be changed. Skin color can't be changed without intervention, without medical intervention. It's not, you don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'd like to have black skin. Listen, I've tried. I've been out. You probably can't see it on the. I've been out all summer long. This is the darkest I've ever been in my life, all summer long. And I've reached a point that I'm not getting any darker, and I don't even need to, I'm to the point to where I don't even need to wear sunblock, and I'm not that's it. It's just my skin is not going to get any darker than this. I joke with my daughter-in-law because she's Hispanic, and I say, look, I'm darker than you are, and she says, I woke up like this, so there's a difference. There are things that are different, you just, it's silly to not acknowledge the fact that things are different, about people, and that people are different. And that you don't, the idea of, trying to call everything a social construct is foolish.
So there's a question. I'll field the question here, and then I'll ask one more question, kind of in this vein, and then we'll move on. But the question online is it possible to be a Christian after having surgery?
Good question. Interesting question. It's interesting. I'm not. The last thing I'm going to do is to try to say that the Bible says something about this. My opinion is fluid. I haven't really locked in on it because I've met people, especially coming to the Bay Area. I've met people that have had sex changes. This is before all the whole gender thing that had changed. They went and had surgery, and now they're girls. I mean, not the in between thing, but I was talking to a woman who used to be a man. And I wouldn't. She didn't look like a woman. I mean, she didn't look like a man. She looked like a woman. And it wasn't until she told me, I was like, wow, great job. Whoever did the surgery did a great job, but the surgeries, I should say. But my point in that is, trying to, balance all of this out. If she came and got saved, would she need to go back to being a man? That's entirely up to her. And I don't mind saying her in this case, because in this case it was a her. There was no going backwards to this. I mean, obviously you can, and there are people that have. There are people that have gone back, but that was their choice. They realized that going back meant that they would jack up their bodies, because going back is, going forward is lucky if you can still function properly. Going backwards is almost guarantee you won't. And so you're not going to go back to have kids, or sometimes even to be able to, have intimate relationships at all. But I think the safe place, is that I think that that's up to the individual. There's no, if they come in and they're and again, you have to kind of, I have to say it this way because, even in the church, I just don't, talk about. We should do a topic on Christian confusion. Because some people they identify as Christians, but they're not Christians, and religious confusion, maybe we could call it.
That's an identity crisis.
But yeah,
we could fit that in.
but because if you come in and you wanna demand that everybody in church use certain pronouns, no, you're gonna have to stop that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're not gonna demand anything of anybody. That you're gonna come in and you're gonna have a humble heart and let God sort out those things, and you just have a good relationship with God. And if people want to call you a he and you want to be called a she and you don't look like a she, that's on you. You are gonna have to deal with that. It's funny because when I first got saved, it was something I've never been a person who hung out with a lot of people. And so getting saved in a church of 500 people it was all 0 to a million, overnight. It was like, and there were so many things that I observed. And one of the things that I observed that I thought was very, very interesting is people that were like, thin-skinned and had these little attitudes. They never made it. They never made it. They would always, one guy, his name was Patrick. You couldn't call him Pat. Patrick. Pat is what you do to your wife's butt. That's what he would always say that.
Wow.
And I'm like, dude, get over it. When I think of Pat, I don't think of something, inferior. Patrick. As a matter of fact, by calling him Pat was like, hey, dude, that's, we call each other Bud. Does it really matter? It's not a big deal. But to him is like, no, Patrick. My name is Patrick. Didn't make it. Another guy. Who's actually the guy that led me to Jesus. Big deal about his name and had to my name is Thomas, not Tom, and things like that, and didn't make it. It's just when you're edgy like that, you're always on the brink of something. You don't make it anyway as a Christian. So, but I think it's something that needs to be at a personal level. There's nothing biblical, that says, you've done this, because this is there. Well, I take that back. There are things actually, biblically speaking, but unrelated to that. Like, for example, marriage. Marriage. If you are married, and the Bible, biblically speaking, if you are married and you get saved, and you both were unsaved, and you get saved, you give your life to Christ, and the unbelieving spouse wants to leave, the Bible specifically says there's no obligation there. If they want to leave, let them leave.
Yeah.
You don't have any obligation. But if you are married while saved, it's a whole nother story. And so it's so yes, there are places for things. So things that you did before you got saved, there's a bit of fluidness in some of those cases. If you came in and you're wanting to get a sex change, well, I think you're on the wrong side of things. But if you have gotten one and you come in and get saved, then it's up to you whether you want to revert back or just continue on in this new gender.
Yeah.
But always understanding,
Yeah.
That that's a part of your testimony.
Yeah.
I was a guy. I wasn't born a female in a man's body. I was a guy. Through confusion and through things that went on in my life, I became a girl.
Yeah.
And that's part of your testimony. Like, I was a drug addict, or I was a, alcoholic, or I was a adulterer or a fornicator or something else. I mean, these are all sins. They're sins, and there's sinful behavior that's associated with those things. And so, but, you can't undo the damage. It'd be like, you get saved and you had a kid out, so you're a single mom and you get saved. Do you need to get rid of your kid? It's like, there are some things that just, let's just be practical about it. You just got saved and you have a kid, love them, care for them, and it might be more difficult. Your life's going to be more difficult. There's going to be, issues that are going to have to be worked through, in terms of, especially depending on your age, and, as far as, finding somebody who's willing to, take on, the responsibility, there's those other factors that are there, because you can't go back, to purity. It'd be nice if you could, but you can't go back to purity, and so sometimes, it's like I said, it's always the individual has to make that decision.
Yeah.
And there's factors, permanence, things like that, that have to be considered.
So let me ask this last question for time's sake. We'll move on after this one. But thinking about, a lot of the stuff you're saying, you're kind of, you kind of mentioned it in small ways, but is this effort against, the quote unquote societal construct from people who are, advocating against things like gender and marriage and,
Yeah.
race and all that, is it possible that this is like some kind of misguided attempt to combat a problem that is actually real? So,
Well,
example.
Yeah,
Example.
There is,
so,
like the real problem of drug abuse, and legalizing drugs.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly.
Is that's
a great example. Actually.
Yeah, that's okay. You haven't solved the problem.
Right.
You have said it's not a problem anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But
so it's not. This is not a problem. We're just going to let it happen, and
Yeah.
we're going to actually encourage it now.
But is it not a problem?
Yeah.
Is it not a problem? So when people OD, on legal drugs,
Happens all the time.
yeah, but so it's not a problem anymore. We
Yeah.
just don't care about people dying from drug overdoses. That's all. So have we solved the problem? Absolutely not. We haven't, by any stretch of the imagination, solved the problem. What we've done is we've ignored the problem 100% and have relabeled it to make us feel good about ourselves. Because the truth of the matter is these people that are throwing around these ideas aren't these things.
Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah,
worst of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the absolute worst of it. It would be different if it was like, coming from my experience and what I've gone through and this and that and my, my professional, point of view, and also my experience personally of having become this thing, as a drug addict. I believe that, as a, not me personally, but as a heroin addict, I believe that we should legalize heroin because it'll make things a lot better.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a heroin addict anywhere that believes that that's a justifiable idea. That's just stupid.
Yeah.
And making it more difficult for them to get heroin is in their best interest, even though they will still leap over the hurdles to get to heroin. The idea, I think, in the mind of a heroin addict would still be, thank you for putting hurdles in front of me, even though I'm not taking advantage of it. Not, I think you should bring these hurdles down so I can, stay high the rest of my days.
Yeah. And not just that, but shorten my days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
then,
So that's, I think at the core that is a real problem.
So then we have to kind of redefine then, or I should say, define in this podcast, what defines the problem? Like what is a problem? What is a problem? And so here's the reason why we can go that direction is because I was thinking about this, scriptures on, society and influence and pressures like that, and how does God see that? You know what I mean? What does God see when He looks at societal pressure?
Right.
And the scripture that came to mind is Exodus 23:2. You shall not follow the crowd in wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So He's defining wrong.
Yeah.
He's saying if the crowd's going that direction,
Yeah.
I still see it as wrong.
Right.
So
Yeah.
clearly there's a definition in God's
Yeah.
mind of what's good
Yeah.
and what's evil.
Yeah.
And the line is clearly...
Well, the other thing, which I don't know how many young people are watching, but I hope they are, is the one thing for me that was always a problem growing up was that I never ever experienced what I thought peer pressure was. because it was always this idea of somebody forcing me to do something that I didn't want to do. And that's not what peer pressure is.
No.
Peer pressure isn't. We want to
Yeah.
do wrong.
Yeah.
It's in us. It's inherent in us. And when we see other people doing wrong and getting away with it, it's attractive to us.
Yeah.
But that's peer pressure.
Yeah.
That's what peer pressure is. It's not. It's not somebody trying to force you to do something that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
It's completely the opposite. It's somebody doing something that you shouldn't do and being a bad example to you,
Yeah.
and encouraging by their example, they're encouraging you to
Yeah.
want to do it. They're not taking some sort of active role. It can be very, very passive. They're not even doing it on purpose. They like doing a certain thing and you're hanging around them and then you fall in. But that's I think, what I think is important to understand when you talk about these ideas of, pressure, that pressure to conform and stuff like that. It's like, it's everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
It's something that comes from inside. There's a classic phrase, from teenagers, everybody's doing it. Why can't I? That's more the issue than the other way around.
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, that's how social constructs come into being is like that. Is there's this thing, and now we have YouTube and influencers. We even have a name for it. They're called YouTube influencers.
Yes.
They're not called YouTube broadcasters. Why not? It should be. That's exactly what they are. They're not called YouTube celebrities. They're called YouTube influencers because they're there to attract attention, to gain a following, a large crowd of following, and to have influence. That's the whole idea, is to be an influencer. And that's not a bad thing, being an influencer, but it just needs the understanding that we have so much access to influencers now that you need some sort of reference point. And that, I think, is the real issue, is not having reference points, outside of yourself, I think, is the big problem. And that's why we fall in. That's why I know from my own life, that's exactly what it was. I started taking drugs because I knew people who took drugs.
Yeah.
Simple as that. I started drinking because I knew people who were drinking. My friends, I should put it more specifically. I did drugs because my friends did drugs. I drank because my friends drank. And I didn't always have friends who drank, and I didn't always have friends who did drugs. It was later on. It was later on in life. And what was interesting is that the kids in high school that didn't like me, I didn't take drugs, I didn't do those things, but there was guys that were taking drugs and partying and stuff like that, and they didn't like me. When they found out that I was going to nightclubs and parties and drinking, all of a sudden we're friends. And it was like, birds of a feather, because the only reason they didn't like me is because I didn't flow with their thing. But once I started flowing with their thing, it was no problem. So this is the real problem, is not having good reference points, and being able to get out of that. Because that's exactly when I got saved, when Jesus came into my life, that's exactly what happened, is that I started to get good reference points because I'm hanging around people, who are saved.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to do those things that I used to do anymore anyway. Because Jesus changed me, but now I'm hanging around with people that showed me how to not go there, and so you need to have reference points.
So we choose our influence then.
Well, we do. We choose our influence by what we want to do, and then we start, there were transitions. There were solid transitions in my life. Going from not taking drugs to taking drugs was overnight. It was like, I part of, what I share with people when I talk about what my life was like is I was literally, every 3 months I was a new me. It was something else. Try something different, and that something different was downhill, in the directions that I was going, because I went from, going to high school, wanting to go to college, and, wanting to have a degree and then, a career, have a family, those kinds of things, to starting to go out and realizing, why would I want to have a family? There's so much, other things that can be done. Family seemed limiting to me. Being able to go to club every night if I wanted to, was like, hey, that sounds a lot better than marriage.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things were starting to be the things that that I was thinking. And so, but from that I started meeting people of similar thinking, and so that just supported, so it's I guess we can end this by saying societal constructs are important when they're good ones.
Yeah. So another question that came in is, what do you think of transgender awareness?
Well, I don't know how clinical that title is being presented, or if you're just simply talking about being sensitive to people. I mean, you can go in so many different directions with that. But the idea that people have problems, mental, internal struggles, anxiety, depression, guilt, I mean, you name it, all over the place. To understand that people have these things, and that's a lot of the driving force behind radical decisions, is to trying to find an escape. That's why, why would somebody, spend their whole life high, if if they didn't find it somehow better than what they were already. And so we make radical decisions. We don't need to, which is another tear at the societal construct, is that we do things that are actually socially unacceptable many times because we are driven by the desires that are within us, and so, being sensitive to people is important. I mean, if you're talking about the clinical, awareness thing, is, listen, everybody's got problems. It's not, people that decide to change gender don't have more problems than people who don't. They just have different problems.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's important, to not label people and put them in a basket just because they have certain behaviors. It's if you're gonna help people, if you want to be the kind of person that helps people, then you have to learn how to identify people as individuals, not as belonging to particular groups.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that's the thing that is definitely relatable in a lot of these like trainings that I've mentioned, I've gone through and stuff like that. It's like clearly like
their group, and they all act the same way.
Yeah,
like and it's ridiculous, because it's a fake, fake sympathy. It's actually somebody who doesn't understand how to be sympathetic. It's like AI. It's like an AI sympathy. It's just, all you're doing is you're just kind of observing what's going around, trying to pick the right factors here that seem to fit the circumstance, and then just kind of, broad brush everything.
Yeah.
Where there's no doubt that there are people, because my experience, and I think experience is a real important factor in all this. It's funny how a lot of these things are, from people that they really don't know people like this. They only clinically know people. They didn't get to really know them, spend time with them, type of thing. They just diagnose them and kick them out of the office to get their next, victim. But, I say that, a little bit, raw, but you know what I mean. Anyway, the, homosexuals, the idea that homosexuals are all like this. When I was growing up, because I have to compare it to something that I'm familiar with, which I'm familiar with homosexuality. It was an issue for me when I was growing up, trying to get my head around it, and so I knew people. I even lived with a guy who was homosexual, and they're not all the same. It's not like everybody's just one identical. They're not cookie cutter. Just because somebody decides I identify as, oh, you're one of those,
Yeah.
I'm this or I'm that. Oh yeah. Doesn't mean that they're not categories that we can slip into, and that from the other side of the coin, we need to be careful that we don't, fit too much into the stereotypes of the categories that we could fit into as well. But it's people are people. They're individuals, and you will have a lot more impact with your life when you start to understand that people are individuals, and you don't just automatically throw people into a, it's funny, knowing people over the years as a pastor and hearing you get this, they get a job and they're really happy about the job, they really love it, and then there's somebody on the job who's trying to do something to them. And so, whether it's a boss or somebody else. And so they end up losing the job, whether they're fired or they quit and they get mad or whatever, and they go to another job and they love that job, and then the same thing happens again. And happens again and again and again and again and again. And the reason is because they put people in categories. They're just, somebody says something and they go, "Oh, you're one of those." Okay, got it. And so that's it. And so now you're irritated at them, you don't like them, you don't want to have anything to do with them because they're one of those, and you have to work with them, and your boss is like, you guys work in the same thing, and we can't have this anymore. You got to go, and it's like, here we go again, see, it's not me. It's there's always these people, if it wasn't for these people, I'd have a great life. It's like, have you ever stopped to think that maybe it's because you're categorizing people and you think you know who this person is, and so you act a certain way towards that person, and they're not really like that, but you think they are, and so that's how you act, and you're acting in a negative way, in an obnoxious way, and breaking relationships because you think these people have already tried to destroy your relationships.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful with that.
So, that's kind of, in a sense, clear the air. This can be our last part of the topic here, but a lot of and I've heard this, I've experienced this personally, and you mentioned it. You hear it on the streets sometimes. Sometimes we'll be we'll be street preaching, and people will walk by yelling something in this vein.
Yeah.
But the idea that you and your God, the prejudice, you're just bigots.
Yeah.
Whatever, that idea is it's there. It's not, I wouldn't call it prevalent. It's not.
Right.
It's not. But it is there. And so there is in this effort to jack societal constructs. There's this like mockery of God, and somehow that Christians are all the same. Yeah. But that's the idea. Is that you've labeled Christians. So that's your problem, and you're never going to be able to see true Christianity because you have this label of how everybody was. And again, I can speak from experience that I know what it's like. And if it wasn't for a unique circumstance of a friend of mine who I'd already known and who had become a Christian, I could have gone to hell for all eternity because of all the garbage that had collected in my thinking about Christians and Christianity and what they were like. And they're all hypocrites because I'd never met one that wasn't. Okay, I've never met one that wasn't, but that doesn't mean they're all like that. Yeah. And the truth is that they're not all. And I learned, by being, becoming a Christian, that there are people who act like they're Christians, and they're the hypocrites. Yeah.
They're not really Christians. They're trying to act like Christians. So the people that you run into and you say, "Oh, Christians are hypocritical." No, you're looking at somebody who's trying to pretend to be a Christian. You're not looking at a real Christian. You're looking at somebody who's pretending to be a Christian, because the reason why they're hypocritical is because they don't have that idea that God's real, and that this is real, and there's going to be judgments for their actions, or all the very practical, basic ideas of what it means to be Christian just don't exist in them. They can act like they want, they can do what they want. God doesn't see, God doesn't know. When it's all said and done, it's like what I'd call the typical hypocritical religious Christian person is the person that acts like Jesus is in heaven, and heaven has nothing to do with earth.
Yeah.
The only thing is he's just kind of airmailed this Bible to us, and we're supposed to do the best that we can. But when we die and we stand before God and we're actually in this eternal place, well, all of a sudden everything's going to be completely different, But and it's going to be like, who are you? What did you do in your life? Did you do good stuff, or because I don't really have much goings on with earth, And so I really don't know anything. Oh yeah, no, I'm a pretty good person, and I, did it, and they're just going to take your word for it. Well, I guess you can come in, everything's going to be fine. That's not how it is. But that's how many people act.
So let's clear the air then. What is, when you're talking about this group of people that a lot of these efforts are aimed at, protecting, how does God view them?
How does God view people that they're protecting? Or
yeah, no. So there is this group of people, transgenders, gays, people who have suffered things of prejudice and racism and stuff like that.
Right.
How does God view these people?
Those people themselves,
people,
or the people that are trying to defend them?
Well, both.
Well, well.
You can answer it in two ways.
I'm purposely digging a hole here that I'm not actually in, but I'm digging it so that other people can fall into it. And the answer to that is, God doesn't look at them as a group. He looks at them as individuals. They're just individuals, and their sins are going to be judged. Just like anybody else's sins are going to be judged, whether it's the people defending them, whether it's the people doing these things, whatever they are. No, not more or less, but based on where they were and why they made the decisions that they made. If you're going to shake your fist up at heaven, and say, I don't care if there's a God or not, I'm going to get a sex change. Well, that's a whole nother way of handling things than, what, I don't really genuinely know who I am. I'm sick of being in the middle, and I'm okay, I'm going to just do this. All right, that's your decision. You've made these decisions. But the moral elements of these things are heart issues, and they're individual issues, and they are things that God is going to deal with us on a personal level. And when we stand before Him, the secrets of our hearts are going to be judged. So we're going to, we're not going to just go on. It's amazing to me how people who, they really think they're fooling other people by putting on a front, putting on a, no, this is the reason why I did this, and you don't understand. But you can't help but act the way you think. You just can't. You cannot. It is impossible for you to not act the way that you think, unless you are a sociopath. You cannot act the way you think, because the truth is that, I think when it comes to that, which is a whole other thing, but sociopathy is more the fact that you don't know how to act anyway. And so your whole life is trying to figure out what the right way to act is, because you genuinely don't know. But that's a whole other story. But other than that, beyond that, you can't, say, oh yeah, I know, I'm really a good person. So, you're not a good person. You know that, but you're putting on an act, because you don't want people to think you're a bad person, and you don't want to think you're a bad person. And so you're going to put on an act to fool you, fool yourself, and you're not going to fool God. So if your reasons for these things are from the standpoint of, I don't care the eternal consequences to my decisions, then that's what's going to be when you get there. You're going to get there, and you're going to stand before God, and it's going to be that you didn't care about your eternal consequences, and that's why you made the decisions you made. And so therefore you are going to be judged, according to how you made those decisions. You made those decisions because you didn't care. Okay, fine, you didn't care. Okay, no excuse. So
yeah, very cool. Well, 8:02, we'll call it tonight. Appreciate everybody joining. Appreciate the questions, and we will be here again next week. We encourage you to join us at 7 o'clock next Tuesday. We'll be looking at a couple other issues. I think I have two more for sure, in this series, but we'll kind of see how things develop. If you guys, if things pop up in your head that we didn't cover in these podcasts, throw those in the comment section, and if we can work those into the next couple topics, we will. Maybe they become their own topic. Throw in your comments, questions that you have after the fact. If you're watching this after the fact, you can ask questions in the comment section. And we look forward to seeing you guys, or being here again next week. And we are going to put some information on your screen here in a second. We want to invite you our midweek service every Wednesday night. It's live, it's in person, and it's at 1100 Industrial Road, Suite. I was going to say G because that's San Jose. 10. Man, I'm mixed up here with my information. But that's at 7 o'clock tomorrow. And we encourage you to join us, and we hope to meet you, and we look forward to being here again next week.